What would you do if the people who were supposed to protect your child were the ones who hurt her most? And what if the only way to fight back wasn't with anger, but with paperwork? My name is Lauren Whitfield. I'm 35 years old. I'm an ER nurse at Pines Regional Medical Center in Raleigh, North Carolina. And on Christmas night, while I was pushing IVs and checking vitals on a floor that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, my 10-year-old daughter walked 2.3 miles home, alone in 24-degree darkness, because my parents told her there was no room for her at the table. She carried every gift she had wrapped herself. She didn't leave a single one behind. When I found out, I didn't scream. I didn't call them. I sat in the break room for 4 minutes with my back against a cold steel locker, and then I went back to work. Because the only thing I could do for my daughter in that moment was stay standing, and 5 hours later, I made one phone call that set everything in motion. If you're still here, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. That December, Emma and I were living in a one-bedroom apartment on Glenwood Avenue. She got the bedroom. I got the couch. The radiator knocked every 35 minutes like a clock nobody set, and the kitchen faucet had a drip I'd learned to sleep through. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and I was fighting like hell to keep it that way. 3 months earlier, my ex-husband Marcus had filed for primary custody. My attorney had made one thing crystal clear. The judge would be looking at stability. Housing, income, environment. Any disruption, any sign that Emma's home life was chaotic, and Marcus's lawyer would use it. So I kept my head down. I worked nights. I picked up extra shifts when they came. I paid every bill on the first of the month without exception. I had no room for mistakes. My parents knew all of this. They knew about the custody hearing scheduled for January 6th, and they used that knowledge the way you'd use a leash on someone who's trying to walk away. Every phone call from my mother ended the same way, not with "I love you," not with "How are you holding up," but with "Don't do anything stupid before the hearing, Lauren." It wasn't advice. It was a reminder that they were holding the rope. The week before Christmas, Emma sat at the kitchen table every night after homework, cutting colored paper, writing cards by hand for every single person in that family. Her handwriting was round and careful, the kind that takes effort. She wrapped each gift in comic strips torn from the Sunday paper because wrapping paper was $5 a roll, and I'd said maybe next time. She didn't complain. She just picked the pages with the most color. On the card she made for my mother, she drew a little sun in the corner and told me, "I draw it so people feel warm when they read it, Mom." I heard that and didn't know what to say. I packed her bag that afternoon like I was sending her somewhere serious. Heavy coat, wool hat, gloves, scarf, a granola bar tucked into her pocket in case dinner ran late. And I slipped an old phone into her coat. No data, no apps, just 2 numbers saved, mine and Nicole Carter's. Nicole was my best friend and a nurse on my floor. She'd known Emma since she was born. "Just in case," I told Emma. "If you can't reach me, call Nicole." Emma smiled and zipped her coat. "Mom, relax. It's just Grandma and Grandpa's house." That was the last time I saw her smile like that for days. At 5:20 that evening, I kissed her forehead in the hospital parking lot, watched her climb into my mother's car, with her bag of gifts and her green sweater, and walked into the ER. That moment felt completely ordinary. I didn't know I would carry it with me for the rest of my life. By 5:25, Emma was walking up the front steps of my parents' house. The windows glowed warm yellow. There was garland on the railing, the smell of roasted turkey and sage drifting through the weather stripping, and Nat King Cole playing from somewhere inside. Emma stepped into the hallway. Carol let her in, then disappeared into the kitchen. And then Emma heard it. Low voices. Her own name. Jason's voice. Her grandmother's voice. Then silence. 10 minutes passed. At 5:35, Carol came back out. The warmth in her face was gone, replaced by that polished, reasonable expression she wore when she was about to say something cruel and call it practical. "Emma, honey, we have a little problem. The table is full. Jason's in-laws came last minute. There's just no room. You should head on home. Your mom will pick you up in the morning." Emma looked down at the bag in her hands. "But I brought gifts for everyone." Carol glanced at the tote the way you glance at a flyer someone hands you on the street. "That's sweet. Just leave them on the porch. We'll open them later. Frank stood in the hallway behind her. He said nothing. Jason looked over his shoulder from the dining room, then turned back around. And here is what Emma told me later, in a voice so steady it broke me worse than crying would have. She looked past her grandmother into the dining room and counted the chairs around that table. 14 chairs, one of them empty. She stood there for 3 full seconds looking at that empty seat. Then she looked up at Carol. Carol did not look back. The front door closed. The wreath shook once, then went still. Nat King Cole kept playing on the other side of that door. My daughter stood on that porch alone, holding a bag of gifts nobody wanted, and she didn't cry. She just turned around, walked down the steps, and started walking. It was 24 degrees. Outside, 3 houses down, a neighbor named Mrs. Doyle was walking her dog. She saw a little girl in a green sweater, moving alone down the sidewalk in the dark, carrying a tote bag. She almost called out. She hesitated, told herself the child was probably heading to a friend's house. She didn't call. She went inside. That detail will matter later. It will matter more than she knew. She didn't take a ride. She didn't knock on a neighbor's door. She just walked. 24 degrees, wind cutting through every gap in her coat, light snow falling just enough to dampen the newspaper wrapped around every gift she was still carrying, because she hadn't left a single one on that porch. 2.3 miles through a neighborhood lit up with Christmas lights, past living room windows where families were sitting together, past trees blinking gold and red from inside warm houses, while my 10-year-old daughter moved through the dark alone, holding a bag of presents for people who had just closed the door in her face. Near the auto shop on Hillside Drive, the streetlights thinned out and the sidewalk disappeared for a stretch. Emma moved to the edge of the road. A car slowed as it passed her, headlights sweeping straight across her face. She stopped. She pulled the tote bag closer. The car kept going. She exhaled, and then she kept walking, alone. On Christmas night, at 5:52, she tried to call me. I was placing an IV line in a 60-year-old man having chest pains, and my phone was in my locker. She called again at 5:54. Voicemail. At 5:57, she called Nicole. Nicole picked up on the second ring and grabbed her keys before Emma finished her sentence. At 6:02, Emma left me a voicemail. 27 seconds. I have listened to it more times than I will ever admit. Her voice was calm. Not the calm of someone who was okay, but the calm of a child who had already decided this was something she was supposed to handle on her own. Mom, Grandma said there was no room. I walked home. I'm okay. I'm in the apartment. Merry Christmas, Mom. Nicole arrived at 6:12. She took a photo the moment she walked in. I still have it. Emma, sitting on the edge of her bed, still wearing her coat, the tote bag of gifts on the floor beside her. One lamp on, the rest of the apartment swallowed by darkness. The newspaper wrapping on those gifts was damp from the snow. She had carried them the entire way home. She hadn't left a single one behind for people who never wanted them. I checked my phone at 10:47 during my 15-minute break. 3 missed calls from Nicole, 1 voicemail from Emma, 0 calls, 0 texts from my mother, 0 from my father, 0 from Jason. I stood in the staff break room with my back against that cold steel locker, and I played the voicemail. Then I played it again. And one more time, because some part of me was waiting for it to stop being real. Nicole had already sent the photo. I opened it, and I looked at the way the light only reached half of Emma's face, and the way the other half just disappeared into the dark behind her. Nicole called me. Lauren. She walked home alone, in the dark. On Christmas. I said, I'll finish my shift. She went quiet. Lauren, I'll finish my shift. And I did. I went back to the floor. I changed dressings and checked vitals and spoke to patients in the calm, even voice they train you to use when everything inside you is breaking and you are the one person in the room who cannot show it. I did not call my mother. I did not call my father. I did not call Jason. There was nothing left to say to any of them. From that moment forward, there was only paperwork. The next morning, December 26th, my mother called at 8:14. I pressed record before I pressed answer. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, and I had known that for years. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. Lauren, I heard Emma went home last night. I'm not sure what happened. I told her to wait while I rearranged a few things and she just left. You know how kids can be so dramatic. I let 3 full seconds pass. Then I said, "She called me at 6:02, Mom. She said you told her there was no room." She walked home. It was 24 degrees. I heard the shift, the quiet recalibration behind that polished voice. Then came the pivot, and then the threat. "I have been supporting you through your entire mess. If you make this into a thing, don't expect us at your custody hearing. Don't expect a roof. Don't expect anything." And before she hung up, she said the one thing she probably thought was power. "You do anything stupid, Lauren, and I will make sure that judge knows exactly what kind of mother you are." 7 minutes and 51 seconds. I saved the file. I named the folder Receipts. Jason texted throughout the morning. Blame, then threats, then a message he sent to me by mistake, meant for my mother. "Don't worry, Mom. She won't do anything. She needs us for the custody thing. She's trapped." I read it twice. Set the phone down. Looked out the window for a long moment. Then I took a screenshot and added it to the folder. He was right about one thing. I needed them for 10 more days. The custody hearing was January 6th. After that, the leash was coming off. What happened on Christmas night didn't come out of nowhere. It was the loudest note in a song that had been playing my entire life. And to understand why that door closed on my daughter, you need to understand who was standing behind it. My mother, Carol Whitfield, was 62 years old and had never met a room she couldn't control. The neighbors called her the backbone of the street. She volunteered at church, remembered every birthday, brought casserole to every funeral. She collected compliments the way some people collect fine china, carefully, and always where everyone could see. At home, she decided who got invited, who sat where, and who was allowed to speak. My father, Frank, 64, had retired early from a logistics company and spent his days in a recliner, agreeing with everything Carol said. His silence was not neutral. It was a vote, cast every single day for 30 years. My brother Jason, 31, had never paid a day of rent in his life. He drove a truck my mother bought him, lived in a house my mother didn't own, and spent money that, as we would later discover, was never hers to spend. In the Whitfield family, there were 2 kinds of children, the investment and the expense. Jason was the investment. I was the expense. When Jason dropped out of college after 2 years, my parents had already paid every dime of his tuition. When I graduated from nursing school, I had done it on federal loans and late-night waitressing shifts that left my feet swollen by midnight. When I crossed that stage, my mother's response was, "Well, at least you finished something." When I got married, she told me to keep it simple. Outdoor ceremony, nothing too much. When Jason married Dana 2 years later, Carol booked a venue with a chandelier and wrote a check for $17,000. She called it an investment in his future. When my marriage fell apart, she said a woman should know how to keep her husband. When Jason and Dana nearly split over credit card debt, she said Dana needed to learn patience. And then there was Emma. Last Christmas, the one before this, Emma had been seated at a small folding table in the hallway, while everyone else sat at the main dining room table. When Emma asked why, Carol said, "The big table is for immediate family, Emma." Emma looked right at her and said, "Am I not immediate family?" Carol changed the subject. I swallowed it. I was 2 months into the divorce filing, sleeping on a couch, terrified that one wrong move would cost me my daughter in family court. So I kept my mouth shut. But someone else heard about that moment. Great-Grandma Rose had called Emma that Christmas, and Emma had told her, quietly, matter-of-factly, that she'd sat alone at the little table. Rose had asked Carol about it. Carol said Emma preferred it that way. Rose believed her. She told me later she would not make that mistake again. Now I need to tell you about the house, because the house is everything. It was a 3-story colonial in a quiet suburb outside Raleigh. White siding, black shutters, a wraparound porch. Rose Whitfield had purchased it in 1988 with cash she had saved over 41 years of bookkeeping and a teacher's pension. In 2006, she established a living trust and placed the property inside it. The guiding clause was simple and absolute. The property shall serve the family, all members, without exclusion. In 2013, Rose moved into Cedarbrook Care, 65 miles west of Raleigh. Carol and Frank moved into the house with no lease, no rent, and no written agreement of any kind. Jason and Dana took the upstairs 4 years after that. Also free, also no contract. Carol had told Rose the basement was damp and unsafe, that there was a mold problem, that nobody should go down there. Rose believed that, too. Nobody checked. About 4 weeks before Christmas, I had stopped by the house to pick up some of Emma's things. I walked into the kitchen, and Carol snapped her laptop shut. Fast, the way you close something you don't want seen. I caught a glimpse of the screen before it went dark. The Airbnb logo. I didn't think much of it at the time. That was my mistake. On the night of December 26th, after I had saved Jason's accidental text and added it to the receipts folder, I opened the Airbnb app on my phone and typed in my parents' address. It took 4 seconds. The listing came up immediately. Cozy Basement Retreat, Raleigh, Nancy, 61 reviews. Superhost, $92 per night. Host, Carol W. I scrolled through the photos. New furniture, warm lamplight, a little basket of toiletries on the nightstand. The basement that Rose had been told was too dangerous to enter. I scrolled to the availability calendar. It was booked solid, including that entire week. Including Christmas night. There was a guest sleeping in that basement while my daughter walked 2.3 miles home alone in 24-degree darkness. I kept scrolling until I found a review posted 5 months earlier. The guest had written that Carol even showed them family photos in the living room, and that it felt like such a warm and welcoming home. She had invited strangers into Rose's house. She had shown them our family photographs on the wall. She had played the gracious hostess in a home she did not own, collecting 5-star reviews and depositing the money into her personal account, while a 90-year-old woman, 65 miles away, had been told the basement was unsafe to enter. I took screenshots of everything: the listing, the photos, the calendar, the reviews, the host profile, timestamp, December 27th, 12:08 in the morning. Then I sat in my dark kitchen for a long time without moving. At 7:20 the next morning, I called Rose. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was thin and a little rough the way it gets early in the morning, but the sharpness in it had not gone anywhere. It never did. I told her everything. Emma at the door, the walk home, the voicemail, the dark apartment, the photograph Nicole had taken. Rose went silent. I counted 8 full seconds. Then she said, "That table seats 16, Lauren. I bought every single chair." I told her about the Airbnb listing. 7 seconds of silence this time. Then her voice came back, low and perfectly level. "So she is making money off my house and turning away my great-granddaughter at the door on Christmas." It was not a question, it was a verdict. Her voice did not shake, but I heard something behind the stillness that I had never heard from her before. Not anger, but something older and quieter and far more certain. The resolve of a woman who had lived 90 years and knew exactly when it was time to use it. "Do you have those screenshots?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Good," she said. "I'm calling Thomas this morning." Thomas Hargrove was Rose's estate attorney in Raleigh, the man who had set up the trust in 2006 and handled every update since. Before she hung up, Rose said one more thing. "Last Christmas, Emma called me to say Merry Christmas. She told me she sat alone at the little table. I asked Carol about it. Carol said Emma preferred it that way." A pause. I believed her. I will not believe her again. Rose had said she was calling Thomas that morning, and Thomas Hargrove did not waste time. He reached me at 2:20 in the afternoon, on December 27th. His voice was the kind that doesn't rush, every word already weighed before it left his mouth. The kind of man who has worn the same gray suit for 20 years and has never once forgotten a clause. He walked me through the legal reality in under 5 minutes. Carol and Frank were what the law calls permissive occupants, people allowed to stay at the owner's pleasure, with no lease, no deed, and no ownership interest of any kind. Under North Carolina law, that pleasure could be withdrawn with 30 days written notice. Rose had instructed him to do 2 things. First, prepare a 30-day notice to vacate addressed to Carol and Frank Whitfield. Second, Draft an amendment to the living trust, removing Carol and Frank as beneficiaries entirely, and naming me as sole beneficiary, with Emma listed as contingent beneficiary. Then Thomas added something that made me grip the edge of the kitchen counter. There's a secondary matter, he said. If Carol has been collecting rental income from trust property without the trustee's knowledge or consent, that may constitute conversion of trust assets. Send me everything you have. I sent him the entire receipts folder that night, at 11:18. His reply came back at 11:52. Received. This is comprehensive. We proceed in the morning. On December 28th, I drove 65 miles to Cedarbrook with Emma in the back seat. She didn't ask many questions. She just knew we were going to see Rose. The facility smelled like lemon disinfectant and cafeteria coffee and something floral the staff sprayed in the hallways that never quite covered the rest. Rose was in the common room, back straight in her wheelchair, a purple cardigan buttoned to the collar, Thomas standing beside her with a leather folder open on the table. A notary and 2 staff members from the facility stood nearby as witnesses. Emma spotted Rose first and said her name like a question and an answer at the same time. Rose opened her arms. "Come here, my little sunshine." She held Emma with one hand on the back of her head, and she held her longer than the moment required. Then she leaned back and looked at her granddaughter's face. "Did you have a good Christmas, honey?" Emma hesitated and glanced over at me. Rose said quietly, "It's okay. The next one will be different. I promise you that." Thomas read the amendment aloud. Steady, formal, every word precise enough to hold up in any courtroom. Carol and Frank Whitfield removed as beneficiaries. Lauren Whitfield named as sole beneficiary. Emma Whitfield named as contingent beneficiary. Rose signed with a hand that trembled slightly, but never once hesitated. The notary pressed her seal. When it was done, Rose looked up at me and held my eyes for a moment longer than necessary. "I should have done this 2 years ago," she said. When Emma called me about the little table, I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Rose then asked for a plain sheet of lined paper. Not legal paper, just a regular notebook page from the staff desk. She wrote by hand, slowly and deliberately, a note to Carol. It said, "Carol, I gave you my home so my family would always have a place. You turned away a child on Christmas. That is not what my home is for. Rose." She folded it, slid it into the envelope alongside the 30-day notice, and looked at Thomas. "Send it." By 4:20 that afternoon, a sealed envelope marked certified mail was heading back toward Raleigh. On January 6th, I sat in courtroom 4B of the Wake County Family Court in a navy blazer I had bought at a consignment shop and pressed the night before. Marcus sat across the aisle, arms crossed, jaw tight, looking at me the way people look at a problem they've already solved in their head. My attorney presented the file, 12 years as an ER nurse at Pines Regional, a current lease, character references, and a letter from Thomas Hargrove confirming that I would soon be moving into a family trust property as the named beneficiary. Stable housing, stable income, stable life. Marcus's attorney attempted to introduce a statement from Carol, claiming I was an unfit and unstable mother. Carol did not appear. She submitted nothing in writing. The space where her signature should have been was blank, and that blank space said everything. Marcus's own attorney paused when he saw it. He glanced over at Marcus. Marcus looked down at the table. USP's tracking confirmed the notice had been delivered to the Raleigh address at 1:18 that same afternoon, signed for by C. Whitfield. The judge ruled at 10:44 in the morning. Full physical custody awarded to me. Marcus would have scheduled visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. I walked out of that courthouse holding the custody order in one hand, and for the first time since Christmas night, my other hand was shaking. Not from fear, from something I hadn't let myself feel in 11 days. At 1:52 in the afternoon, my phone rang. "Carol." I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. Her voice had come apart at the seams. "What is this? What did you do?" "This is our house, Lauren," I said. "It's Rose's house, Mom. It always has been." She threatened to contest it. Said Rose was not in her right mind. Said the documents weren't valid. I told her Rose had been evaluated by her physician the week before and was fully competent, that the amendment and the notice had both been reviewed and were legally sound. Frank grabbed the phone. "We have lived in that house for 18 years, I said. "You have 30 days, Dad." Carol took the phone back. Her voice had changed again, higher now, unraveling at the edges. "Where are we supposed to go?" I let 3 seconds pass, long enough for her to hear the silence. Then I said, "I don't know, Mom. Somewhere with enough room." The line went dead. She didn't hang up gently. Carol's first instinct was not to apologize. It was not to call Rose. It was not even to call a lawyer. Not yet. Her first instinct was to perform. The morning after I told her she had 30 days, she posted on Facebook, public, not friends only, public, because she wanted reach. She wrote that her daughter had been manipulating an elderly grandmother to take away the family home, that they had poured their hearts into that house for nearly 2 decades, and she asked people to pray for them. 74 reactions, 41 comments. Neighbors from her church called her a saintly woman. Jason pinned his own comment beneath hers. "My sister is trying to steal our inheritance. Don't be fooled." Not one of those people knew a 10-year-old girl had walked home alone in 24-degree darkness on Christmas night because of the woman they were praying for. Carol's pastor called me that same week. I asked him one question. "Did she tell you my 10-year-old walked home alone in 24-degree weather on Christmas night?" A long silence. Then he said she had described it as a misunderstanding. I told him I had a 27-second voicemail from my daughter, recorded from an empty apartment that night. I asked if he would like to hear it. He didn't answer that question. He said he would pray for the family. I thanked him and ended the call. That same week, Carol deleted the Airbnb listing, scrubbed the page, pulled the photos, removed every review. She must have believed that if the listing no longer existed, neither did the evidence. But Thomas had already captured the full listing through the Wayback Machine, and the financial records obtained through the legal subpoena existed completely independently of any website. You can delete a listing. You cannot delete a bank deposit. Then something happened that Carol did not expect. One of her former guests found the Facebook post and left a public comment asking whether she was the same Carol from the Airbnb basement listing, mentioning they had stayed there twice and had assumed the grandmother owned the house. The post was deleted within 2 hours. I had already taken the screenshot. Carol then hired a lawyer named Phil Dutton, a general practice attorney whose office on Midland Avenue had a stock photo of a gavel on the website, and the tagline, "Fighting for Your Rights." He was not a trust specialist. He was not a property attorney. But he was available and willing, and Carol needed someone to hold the rope she was already losing grip on. Phil sent Thomas a letter on letterhead, so thin you could nearly read through it, arguing that 18 years of continuous residency constituted implied tenancy and that the 30-day notice was defective and unenforceable. Thomas called me the next morning. If you didn't know him, you might have mistaken his tone for boredom. It wasn't boredom. It was the calm of a man who had seen that letter 100 times and knew exactly what it was worth. Implied tenancy requires evidence of rent payment or a written lease, he said. Your parents have neither. The notice stands. Thomas sent Phil a 4-page response, the certified trust deed, the physician's letter confirming Rose's full cognitive competency, the notarized amendment, and tucked into the final exhibit like a grenade, wrapped in legal stationery, a complete summary of the Airbnb documentation, 61 reviews, $92 per night, 3 years of booking records, and an estimated total income of $58,600. Then Phil did something that told me everything. He called Thomas directly. Not by email, by phone. His voice had changed. It was the voice of a man who had just finished reading 4 pages and understood which side of this he was standing on. He said, "Mr. Hargrove, I need to be straight with my client here. If you can actually prove that Airbnb income," Thomas said, "it's on the internet, Mr. Dutton, 61 reviews. The Wayback Machine has archived copies going back 3 years. A long silence followed. Then Phil said he would advise his clients to consider their options. He recommended Carol not contest the notice. Carol fired him, because he had told her something she didn't want to hear out loud. She would face the court alone. On February 7th, a second envelope arrived at the house. A formal demand letter, 3 pages, with a number at the bottom that had a comma in it. That evening, Frank called me. His voice had the quality of something structural giving way, the sound a wall makes when the last support is pulled. "Lauren, we don't have $58,000. Your mother spent it. The truck, the credit cards, a cruise last spring. It's gone," I said. "That's between you and Rose's attorney, Dad," he said. "What happens if we can't pay?" I said, "Then Thomas files." He said, "Okay," and he hung up. It was the quietest surrender I had ever heard. Carol sent me a text, 6 words. "We're not leaving." "This is home." I forwarded it to Thomas. He replied 2 words, "Filing Monday." In the weeks that followed, Carol drove to Cedarbrook and walked into the facility lobby asking to see Rose. The front desk checked the visitor authorization list. Carol's name was not on it. Carol asked to speak with a supervisor. The supervisor told her the same thing, politely and firmly, the way healthcare workers learn to deliver an answer that is not going to change, no matter how many times the question is asked. Carol began to cry in the lobby. She stayed for 14 minutes. When it became clear that tears were not going to open that door, she was told that if she was unable to leave on her own, security would be called. She left. From the parking lot, she called Rose directly. Rose answered and listened for 15 seconds. Then she said, "There was no misunderstanding, Carol. Talk to Thomas." And she ended the call. A process server arrived at the house on a Wednesday morning. Frank opened the door. The server handed him the summons and had him sign the acknowledgement. Frank looked at the papers, then at the server, then back at the papers. His face went the color of old concrete. He had to read those documents alone and wait for Carol to come home. The hearing took place before Judge Sandra Park. The courtroom was small and fluorescent lit and smelled like recycled air and old paperwork. Carol sat at the respondent's table alone, beige wool coat, pearl earrings, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for Sunday service to begin. Thomas presented the case. The trust deed, the 30-day notice with its certified mail receipt and USP's tracking confirmation, the physician's capacity letter, the trust amendment, and then, as a supplementary exhibit, the complete Airbnb documentation, the earnings statement, the listing screenshots, the reviews, the archived Wayback Machine capture. Judge Park reviewed the file. Then she looked at Carol and asked, "Did you receive rental income from trust property?" Carol started to answer. "It was just a small..." The judge said, "Did you or did you not?" The courtroom was very quiet. I could hear the ventilation system running. Carol said, "Yes." The judge ruled in 14 minutes. Writ of possession granted. Carol and Frank Whitfield were ordered to vacate the premises within 10 days. I was sitting behind Thomas when the ruling came down. I didn't move. I didn't exhale loudly or let anything show on my face. I had learned a long time ago how to hold things in until the moment passed. That same week, Mrs. Doyle called me. She was the neighbor who had seen Emma walking alone on Christmas night and had talked herself out of stopping her. Her voice was careful and a little unsteady. She said she should have called out to Emma, that she had known something was wrong and done nothing, and that she was sorry. She said if I ever needed a written statement, she would provide one without hesitation. I thanked her and I meant it. They moved out on a Saturday in mid-February. Nicole drove past the house that afternoon at my request, not because I needed to watch, but because I needed to know it was real. She texted me at 3:18. "They're gone." Carol had taken everything. The furniture, the Christmas dishes, the curtains, the bathroom mirror, even a box of cotton swabs from the cabinet under the sink. But she left the photograph. It was still hanging on the living room wall, slightly crooked. A framed picture of Rose, standing in front of the house in 1988, and written on the back in her handwriting. "For my family, all of them." Carol knew which things she had earned, and which things she hadn't. At the end of February, Emma and I pulled up in front of the house. Emma looked up at the front steps, the same steps she had stood on Christmas night, holding a bag of gifts in 24-degree cold, before a door closed in her face. She said, "Is this ours, Mom?" I said, "This is Rose's. She's letting us take care of it." Emma nodded, like that made complete sense. The way children accept things that are true before the world teaches them to complicate the truth. She chose the upstairs bedroom that looked out over the backyard, where Rose had kept a vegetable garden decades ago. She walked in and spread her arms out wide, turning in a slow circle to feel the size of the room. I stood in the doorway and watched her, and did not try to name what I was feeling, because I knew if I named it I would lose it entirely. That evening, I FaceTimed Rose. A staff member at Cedarbrook propped the phone on her tray table. Rose watched through the screen as Emma taped a handmade sign to her bedroom door, her name written in round, careful letters, and in the corner, a small hand-drawn sun. Rose said quietly, "The little sunshine is home." After we moved in, I signed Emma up for a Saturday art class at the community center. She had stopped drawing after Christmas, stopped carrying her sketchbook, stopped putting suns on things, the way light fades out when someone pulls the curtains closed without asking. The first Saturday she came home with a large sheet of butcher paper rolled under her arm. She unrolled it on the kitchen table, and I saw what she had made. A house, drawn carefully in the center, with 16 chairs arranged around a big table. Each chair had a name written on it: Rose, Mom, Nicole, Mrs. Doyle, and the chair in the best spot, the one with the clearest view of the window. That one said, Emma. She had drawn a small sun on every single chair. She was not at the little table anymore. She had put herself at the big one, right where she belonged. I also did something for myself that month that I probably should have done years earlier. I found a therapist. Not because I was broken, but because 30 years inside a family like mine leaves patterns you don't even see until someone shines a light directly at them. In our first session, I told her I had spent my whole life trying to be small enough to keep the peace. She asked, "And how did that work out for you?" I said, "It didn't." She said, "No, it never does." In March, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. Careful, deliberate loops, the penmanship of someone trying to look composed. I opened it at the kitchen table. It said, "Lauren, I'm your mother. This has gone far enough. Can we talk?" 8 words, no apology, no mention of Emma, no acknowledgement of the walk home, or the voicemail, or the photograph, or the $58,000 that belonged to a 90-year-old woman. Just, "Can we talk?" As if the problem were a conversation that hadn't happened, rather than a decade of choices that had. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the receipts folder. Same shelf, same system. I did not respond. I did not block her number either. If she wanted to reach me, she could go through Thomas. That was the boundary. Not a punishment, but a door that worked the way doors are supposed to. You could knock. You just couldn't walk in and rearrange the furniture. Rose called every week. Her voice was tired but steady, like a handrail on a staircase you're afraid to climb. She told me once about a Thanksgiving in 1978, when her mother-in-law told her she wasn't welcome at the table. She said she still remembered the walk to the car. She remembered the cold. "I swore no woman in my family would ever feel that again," she said. "I'm keeping that promise." Spring came slowly that year. Emma rode her bike on the sidewalk out front. Mrs. Doyle waved from her porch every afternoon, and sometimes brought over banana bread. Nicole came by on Fridays with takeout. I sat on the front porch some evenings, the same porch where my daughter had stood 5 months earlier in the dark and the cold, holding gifts for people who turned her away. One night, after Emma was asleep, I thought about the question she had asked me in those first quiet days after Christmas. Her voice had been calm, steadier than it had any right to be. "Mom, does Grandma not like me because I'm a problem?" I had held her, and told her the only true thing I knew how to say. "You are not a problem. You have never, ever been a problem. Family is not a table someone seats you at. It is how people treat you when they think no one is watching, and someone is always watching." A 10-year-old girl with a bag of gifts wrapped in comic strips, and a memory that does not forget. Emma is 11 now. She still draws suns on everything, and the front door of this house stays open. That's our story. Mine and Emma's. If it meant something to you, if you've ever been told there was no room for you, or if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your child, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Thank you for staying until the end.